Hello and welcome to another Senedd Election Special, a co-production of Emma and Tom Talk Teaching and the Impact Podcast. We've joined forces to interview the education spokespeople of all 6 major parties contesting the Senedd elections here in Wales in May 2026. Today it's the turn of Plaid Cymru and their spokesperson is Cefin Campbell. We'll listen to the interview with Jane, Finola and me, first of all, and then afterwards we'll have post-match analysis with Dr Gareth Evans, Director of Education Policy at the University of Wales, Trinity, St David. So, first of all, here's the interview.
Today we're talking to Cefin Campbell, Plaid Cymru member of the Senedd for the Mid and West Wales region. Since May of 2024, Cefin has been the party's education portfolio holder. Cefin, thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Well, we've got some questions, so we're just going to go straight into the questions. And these are questions that we believe our listeners would be particularly interested in. The first one, we know that standards of attainment in Wales are not where they should be. PISA has put Wales at the bottom of the 4 nations. Eston's annual report describes the impact of planning for literacy in all phases of schools as remaining too variable, and the teaching of mathematics and numeracy as having persistent weaknesses. In autumn of 2025, Plaid Cymru committed to access to library spaces in every school, a foundational literacy and numeracy plan, national benchmarks, targeted support, and high quality teaching with clear progress tracking. So how will these commitments raise standards of attainment for pupils in Wales?
Okay, so you've raised a number of points then. I'll try and address each and every one of them. So let's set the context. You're absolutely right. Under the Welsh Labour government, education standards in Wales have declined basically since the formation of the Assembly as it was and now the Senedd. So since records began back in 2006 when Wales entered the PISA system.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I know that we've got limited time. We know that the situation is bad. I'm just going to focus on what you as a candidate, because we're going to be asking all the other candidates what as Plaid Cymru are you seeing as the way in which you're going to raise those standards?
So we need to understand that the main challenges are around literacy and numeracy. So you quite rightly said that we have a literacy and numeracy plan that we will be putting in place, and that will be a priority, that we need to raise those standards that have been falling over the last 26 years. And we are below the OECD average, so that is not where we want to be. So there'll be an absolute commitment with benchmarking systems in place to allow pupils and teachers and parents as well to know where their children are. There will be a focus on using books to encourage children and young people to read, once again, and fall in love with books. And that is a cornerstone of our literacy plan. We will ensure that every school in Wales has a library, and then reading across the curriculum will also be encouraged across all subject areas. Now, we also need to support teachers as well. We have a hugely dedicated workforce in Wales, but they need to be better supported by professional learning opportunities, but also they need to be supported as well in tackling the other issues around attendance, the well-being of pupils, mental health issues, the violence in schools, disruptive behaviour, and all of that. So we are developing the idea of wraparound schools where all of the services that support, for example, mental health and disruptive behaviour are there on campus to support teachers. And then the professional learning aspect, we are looking at ways of allowing more time in the curriculum to support teachers in their development work. And also with PPA, we're looking at considering allowing teachers to have time away from school to do their PPA.
Okay, can I just come back to one point on standards? And I know that Jane's got a question on professional learning, and that might follow on really nicely from that. Just going back to your national benchmarks, are you talking about expectations for literacy and numeracy that are clear to, as you said, pupils, teachers, parents?
We need to understand where every child is in terms of his or her development in literacy. So those benchmarks will allow the pupils themselves, teachers and parents, to know where they are. It will also identify where that extra support is needed, and that extra support will be there through resources and also professional development.
Okay, thank you. Jane?
That there has been an enormous shift in the way that teachers are supported. And I think this idea of timing to support the curriculum, their curriculum work and their PPA is one that you've already mentioned. But we know that inspection has already moved from once in every 6-year cycle to twice a year. Consortia are no longer driving professional learning, and it's schools with the help of the LA. Dusky and Adnod are 2 new professional organisations who've really yet to prove their worth. It's early days. But Plaid has quite rightly asked the question, how can our pupils succeed without a strong, well-supported workforce of brilliant teachers? So could we just look a little bit more in detail about what will you do to ensure the professional learning support that teachers are provided within Wales is really indeed the support that they need?
Yeah, well, Dusky, as you know, has been set up to support teachers with their professional learning, and we are expecting Dusky to give a lead on this. Now, we know that STL reports have consistently shown for the last 20 years that the quality of teaching is not what it should be, and that pupils are underperforming, and there is a correlation between the two. We also know that we need better leadership skills in Wales. Now, we have dedicated and committed teachers. What I feel they haven't had is the relevant support and targeted support to allow them to become better teachers and leaders in schools. And this will then reflect in, I hope, increased standards in education in Wales that have been falling consistently, unfortunately, over the last 20 years.
You mentioned in your previous question, we were talking about standards, that teachers, that you were talking about potentially having more PPA for teachers, that's non-contact time, so that they can plan and prepare. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, what we would do is we'd set up a working group to look at ways of 2 things. One, whether there is room in the curriculum to allow for more PPA. And as I mentioned earlier on, that PPA, in my opinion, that time to do the preparation and the planning work and marking and so on should be allowed to happen outside of school, at home or in a local library or wherever a teacher feels comfortable, and having that space and time to do that quality bit of research or planning. And secondly, it's about setting up another working group to look at flexible hours as well, because one of the things the teachers are telling me, and teachers' unions in particular, is that when you compare teaching to other jobs, that flexibility isn't there. So, we could well look at maybe teachers working an extra few hours, during the week, and having a Friday off every couple of weeks or whatever. So there are different models we could look at, and I would be keen to set up a working group to look at the options available in terms of making teaching more flexible. And we've got to remember as well that about 70% of the workforce in Wales are women. And they have childcare responsibilities. There are always challenges around school holidays and so on. So let's look at ways of making teaching more flexible and attractive.
Before we come on to Tom's question about funding, sorry, Fionn, I'm just going to come back to professional learning, because you've talked about the structures and systems by which teachers may have more professional learning. But what about the quality of professional learning that they do have? Because, of course, with the middle tier review, as it was originally called in Wales, there was a lot of change. Consortia were demoted, so to speak, and we've now got this national professional learning body. How will you ensure that the professional learning that is available to teachers from local authorities and from Dusky is actually the quality that professional learning that will make a difference?
Well, what we've seen over the last couple of years is a big change in terms of the way schools have been supported. We've now moved away from the consortia model, although I believe one consortia still exists in South East Wales, but generally it's in a bit of a churn at the moment. So there is a real danger that schools might be falling in between the cracks, and that the support available is inconsistent and fragmentary. So we need to ensure that support is in place, and that is the main responsibility of Dysgu as a professional body, to drop a strategy that does provide high quality professional learning. And if I was a future education minister, I would want to have regular discussions with Dysgu to ensure that strategy allows for high quality professional learning support.
Thank you. Tom, your question on funding.
Yeah, actually, just before we move on to funding, just to pick up on these questions about teaching and standards and that sort of thing. I mean, we've been in a really kind of major curriculum reform for over 10 years now. Do you think those curriculum reforms, the curriculum for Wales, have actually been a help or a hindrance to standards in Wales? And if Plaid Cymru take power in a couple of months' time, will you stick with curriculum for Wales?
Well, we've always welcomed the national curriculum. I think it's important for Wales, like other countries within the United Kingdom, to have a bespoke curriculum that talks to young people about Wales, that reflects Wales's history, language, culture, and so on, because we are different. And I think young people need to understand that, which is why we've always supported the idea of having a national curriculum for Wales. What teachers are telling me is that there is a lack of clarity around the delivery of that national curriculum. So obviously, it is something I would be keen to look at in order to ensure that consistency of delivery is there, with resources made available to help teachers understand that they are being supported better than they are at the moment.
Okay, moving on to funding then. There's quite a lot of promises coming from Plaid Cymru, which imply quite a lot of money being spent. The one I think that perhaps we haven't seen would be a commitment to take all schools out of deficit budgets, because the number of schools who are posting deficit budgets is only going in one direction, and it's the wrong direction. Will Plaid Cymru commit to ensuring that no school is in a situation that they're running a deficit and not able to provide the services that they need to for their young people?
What Plaid Cymru will do is to commit to providing local authorities with more funding, and I would hope that funding, that extra funding for local authorities, is passed on to schools so that they don't have to live with that deficit that hangs over them and makes life extremely difficult for schools to operate as they would want. So that would be the route to support schools, is through increased funding to local authorities, especially rural authorities who've not had that level of support in the past. And we know that the costs facing small rural schools and the rurality issue in general is far higher than schools in more urban areas.
Just a supplementary question here. Sorry, Tom, can I
carry on.
Come back on something about standards? You talked about making sure that education is doing the job that children need, and raising standards and literacy is very focused on, of course, reading. And reading has been very much in the news. And obviously, we've watched you ask multiple questions in the Senedd about reading and about the situation with the teaching of early reading in Wales. What is Plaid Cymru's policy for how to ensure that every child learns to read well early?
The important part of that is embracing a culture around reading, which makes young people, and children in particular, feel that a book or a digital tablet is giving them the pleasure and knowledge that they thrive on. And that means that encourage them to re-engage with reading is so important. Now, when we look at Ireland, for example, the Republic of Ireland, about 20 years ago, they were struggling in terms of literacy levels. Now, they decided as a government to laser focus on improving literacy. And what they have done is changed the whole culture. They're now at the top, or amongst the top performing countries in the world in terms of literacy, because they've honed in on the kind of back to basics approach in getting children to read once again. Because if you can't read, then you can't develop skills, you don't get better qualifications, and you don't take opportunities of the life opportunities available to you. So there's going to be a laser focus on improving reading and literacy skills.
What's really interesting about the Republic of Ireland, you're absolutely right, they have had a laser focus on literacy, but one of the things that has happened as a result is that teachers in the Republic of Ireland are choosing themselves to use systematic synthetic phonics as their preferred method. Does Plaid Cymru have a policy around how to support teachers to choose the most evidence-based approach to the teaching of early reading? Because it's very hard for children to enjoy reading if they can't do it.
Well, absolutely. So we will focus on an evidence-based criteria for teaching literacy and numeracy with all children taught to read using systematic synthetic phonics. Now, that will then have to be consistent across every school in Wales so that children know that learning to match letters and sounds effectively is, the proven route to develop reading skills.
Thank you. Tom, do you have any other questions?
A lot of these promises that involve spending money appear to be predicated on the idea that you're somehow, if you come to power, you're going to manage to persuade the Westminster government to give loads more money to Wales. But in 2024, the Institute for Fiscal Studies made it very clear when you made similar suggestions in the 2024 general election campaign that actually revisiting the Barnett formula would not result in any more money for Wales. In fact, could result in less. How can we be sure that any of this money, any of this expensive stuff that you're promising is actually going to materialise?
Well, if I could just make one point before tackling that particular question, is that our manifesto pledges have all been costed given the financial envelope that is available to us now. So everything that we will cost will be based on current expenditure. So going on to your question, now that report by the Institute of Fiscal Studies was carried out many, many years ago. Now things have moved on since then, and the needs of Wales have changed. And I don't think that study looked at all, the options available in terms of the fiscal responsibilities that United Kingdom government would have towards a country like Wales with increasing needs.
Okay, I think we've covered all of the questions that we have put out, but there's one last thing that we'd like to ask you. If you're talking to the teachers and the head teachers, particularly of Wales, who are our listeners, on the new teachers who are the Cardiff Metropolitan University's listeners, what key message do you want to say to our listeners that would help them to make their minds up about which party that they should vote for in the upcoming Senedd elections?
I want teachers to be valued. I want teachers and potential teachers doing initial teachers training, for example, young people in schools at the moment, to see teaching as a hugely valuable and rewarding profession. And it would be our responsibility as a new government in May to ensure that we provide them with the best support possible through professional learning, but also looking at the challenges they face around attendance and well-being of pupils and disruptive behaviour, putting all of those mechanisms in place to support them and allow them to do what they do best, which is to teach in front of a classroom. But also we would look at flexible learning. We would look at things like PPA being available outside of schools, so that the extra burden of administration as well, we would look at that to make sure that that is challenged. So really, we want teachers to believe that we will make teaching a better profession for them. And we know that recruitment of teachers is a huge challenge. Retaining teachers is also a challenge as well. So I genuinely want young people to believe that teaching is a fantastic profession, but I know there's a lot of negativity around that profession at the moment. I want to get rid of that negativity and show that the profession is moving forward and supporting teachers in a better way.
Cefin Campbell, thank you very much for your time this morning, and we look forward to seeing the result of the election.
Croeso. Thank you.
That was our interview with Cefin Campbell, and as promised, I'm joined now by Dr Gareth Evans, who's the Director of Education Policy at the University of Wales, Trinity St David, for some post-match analysis. Gareth, what did you make of that?
An interesting interview, Tom. I think a revealing interview. There were lots of things that we might have anticipated hearing in there. One or two things may be conspicuous by their absence, but I think what was there were a number of things that I thought striking. One of which actually was the phrase "back to basics," which is a phrase that Plaid has used, or Cefin Campbell has used a number of times now in reference to education. I wouldn't disagree with the tenor of that sentiment. We do, I think, in Wales need to refocus our attention on, key skills, literacy, numeracy, the acquisition of knowledge, the things that we have argued, you and I, in the past, might be absent from the curriculum for Wales. But the phrasing is interesting, and I think Plaid has got to be a little bit aware, a little bit understanding of previous use of that phrase. And my mind was drawn back, funnily enough, to the sort of the Govian era of the early 2010s, when the Conservatives came into power in Westminster and argued again for a back to basics approach to education, which ended up being, didn't it, a return to rote knowledge, to cultural capital, to retention of facts. It was a lot more didactic. It was based on data, a very different education system to the one that we are building and co-constructing in Wales today. So whilst I don't disagree with the phrase and the sort of sentiment of the phrase, politically it has some sort of previous. And do you remember that period, Tom? I mean, it's you almost, if you're a government coming in, I'm not sure really you want to be associated with all of that.
Well, no, I mean, the reason I laughed was I went back even further and I thought of John Major's ill-fated 1990s Back to Basics campaign, but that was something entirely different. But no, you're right. I mean, Plaid is seen as generally a left-leaning party. And of course, that education policy from the Conservatives was very much more right-leaning that. Interesting. I wonder whether there was a link there to the fact that Finola did manage to extract from him a commitment to the use of phonics.
Yes, which again, I think, to be honest, most people with knowledge of these things would appreciate. I think Plaid is quite right, actually, notwithstanding what we've just said, to focus or refocus its attention on literacy and numeracy. I certainly thought sort of inherent in what Cefin was saying was an understanding that we might have lost a bit of focus on those things, and I think he would be right to think that. So I think this idea, I think he described it as a planned in your strategy, a literacy numeracy strategy, would be for me a good idea. And I was also quite taken by the fact that he's going or is interested in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland. Ireland having performed incredibly well in PISA in the domain of reading. I think now second only to Singapore in the whole world. I mean, a really remarkable turn of fortunes given where they were sort of 15 years ago. Their PISA results of 2009 very much, like ours, in fact, triggered this new approach to reading and numeracy. Their literacy strategy came in, I think, 2011. And, I don't know the ins and outs of their system, but you would assume that what they have done has paid dividends. So I think, he's looking in the right places, isn't he?
Looking in the right direction. Yeah, I think if I were to be briefly a little bit critical, I would say that Plaid is one of two parties, along with Reform UK, who, if the polls are to be believed, are potentially within striking distance of taking power within a matter of weeks. And with that in mind, there were some parts of that discussion that felt perhaps a little vaguer than one might like. I mean, obviously, you heard me tackle him on the question of funding. There's an awful lot of stuff kind of coming out of the Plaid machine, which implies big price tags, whether that's bursaries for ITE or other things, flexible working for teachers and recruiting thousands of people to the profession. And I still don't feel that we've got more than a sort of wish list going on there in some areas. Yeah,
and you're right. I mean, the stuff around flexible learning, flexible working, for teachers is something that I think you and I, as being involved and immersed in that ITE world, would certainly explore or be keen to have a look at. As is the suggestion that there might be more time for teachers to do their PPA outside of school hours, or at very least, a little bit more non-contact time. Wales, along with the rest of the constituent parts of the UK, having very poor relative to the other OECD countries, a very poor proportion of non-contact time. So I welcome some of these ideas. I was also quite interested by his thoughts about what he described as wraparound schools that would have, as he called it, on-campus support, student support, which is, again, it makes perfect sense, but the financial implications and the human resourcing implications there are massive. So you are absolutely right. These are, I think, really interesting and worthy ideas. But how they are going to be funded is a little bit less clear, and I'm always reminded by, something Carwyn Jones used to say as First Minister: if you introduced something new, you're going to have to think about what you take away. And we've got to, I don't see, as I think, was implicit in your questioning, I don't see there being this sort of this brown paper envelope full of cash that we can just call upon when the new government walks into. But I just don't see it being there or see it happening. So difficult decisions will always have to be made, and I suppose we'll have to wait and see which of these ideas makes it into policy, won't we?
Yeah, there was a lot of use of language like we want to look into, or we hope to. And you sort of find yourself wondering, has a strategic decision been made there that actually the voters are not actually going to be grabbed by a list of we're going to and we will do this, and actually we're looking to and we hope is, educationally speaking, is good enough. I don't know whether that makes me a happy bunny, really.
What did you think, Tom, about the stuff Kevin said around recruitment and retention? I mean, it came up right towards the end of the conversation. I felt actually it might have been discussed a little earlier when we were talking about some of the issues around quality of teaching. But what did you make of that?
Well, I mean, we know that they've made a specific commitment to increase the bursaries for initial teacher education. So sort of one-off payments to get people into the profession. We know that those have been a really big thing over in England until very recently. And in fact, they've just got rid of them, or they've cut them significantly over in England. And the evidence doesn't seem to be there that that's actually had the impact that they might have hoped over in England in terms of recruitment. So again, it's this sort of short-term, slightly shiny thing of, we'll give people £10,000 or whatever it is to come into the profession, and slightly shorter on the detail on, well, how are we going to keep them there once they go in? I mean, we know from news stories that there are, internet forums of people advising each other out in England how to go into a PGCE and pocket the deposit for a house and then probably run for the hills. Wales. I think also there've been vague commitments about recruiting, thousands more people into the profession. But again, we can't fill the places that we already have. So I don't quite see how that translates into something you can actually tangibly feel in schools.
Yeah, I think there's something more fundamental going on here, isn't there? And it's around the stuff. And it was interesting. I thought that he touched upon it at the very end of the interview. Again, if I were, heaven forbid, in a position of becoming minister one day, I mean, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, Tom. I think one of the first things I would look to do is boost the profile, and it's a fairly, glib and straightforward thing to say, easy thing for me to say, isn't it? But how you make our teaching profession the profession that kids finishing their compulsory education want to join is, I think, where this argument starts and finishes. And we ask ourselves, are we all collectively, as universities, as government, as schools actually, because in very many cases we know that teachers are a wonderful sell for the profession, but also in some cases a pretty poor sell, because they take their work home with them and they relay this, what can be fairly poor representation of what it is they have to do on a daily basis. And whilst I don't deny that any of that is true, sometimes we're not our own best help, are we? We're a bit more of our worst enemy. So I think we've all got to come together and do a better job of selling the profession that we know it can be, and in very many cases is, but until government of whatever hue and colour gets around to dealing with that, I think we're always going to have this issue around supply and demand. We're always going to be pulling in people from any which way just to fill gaps in our schools, and until we get to that luxurious position where we can be a slightly more selective, to be frank, I think we're going to struggle.
Yeah, there's fascinating stuff out there about teacher recruitment. I mean, we've got an episode on that with a academic from over in the Institute of Education, and actually once you dig into it, the complexities are amazing. And I would definitely encourage whichever political party ends up on the levers of power to have a listen to that and see all of that. Just picking up really quickly on that point you make about a more selective profession, we know we have a very ambitious curriculum framework which is requiring an awful lot of our teachers, and it is implying that teachers need to be of the absolute highest quality and have all that space and time and all the rest of it. I did try to press Cefin Campbell on whether Plaid Cymru would stick with curriculum for Wales, and he sort of slightly did a little sidestep and said that he felt that Wales needed its own distinct curriculum. He didn't specify that it should be the one that we've got. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's going to be continuity curriculum for Wales if Plaid come in, or does that reference to the Republic of Ireland suggest they might have plans?
That's a very good question. To be honest, I hadn't read it in quite the same way. My understanding or my impression would be that they would continue with the curriculum for Wales, and I think would be well advised to continue with the curriculum for Wales, albeit there will be, I think, have to be inevitably some changes, and whether they are minor modifications or more substantial tweaks remains to be seen. And I think actually, to give him his dues, that is the sort of thing you do once you are in a position of power. You do get some sort of read across from civil servants. You get to understand from the sort of centre how things are working. I mean, he will be picking up things as you and I do when we go out into schools and when we speak to teachers about what's working on the ground, but you never really see it until you get into that position, you get into that hot seat, and you understand exactly how the policy is shaping up and how funding is being distributed, and you can have more informed conversations with what's left of the regions and the local authorities and what have you. So you become then more au fait with the situation by definition. You get to understand things a little better. So actually, I give him his dues there in that he probably can't tell you exactly what he's going to do just yet. You want to have the full range of evidence available to you. But what I would recommend, and I've recommended to you in previous discussions, is that we have a quick and dirty review of the curriculum. And when I say quick and dirty, I don't mean a Donaldson-esque 9 months drawn out thing, and we're back to square one and we're reinventing wheels. Nothing like that. Somebody to go in, to have a look at how things are working with as an objective eye as one can possibly have, and report back to the minister that these are the key issues. These are the things that we need to resolve to make this, behemoth work as it was intended to work. So I think, actually, as I say, and he highlighted, didn't he, issues around consistency, around variation, the sorts of things you would hope a minister in waiting highlights. So I think, actually, although it was a fairly quick response to, your very deep, and thoughtful question, I think he probably only really told you what he could at this stage. The other thing, Tom, if I may, before we finish, that I think is worthy of note on this, and it's a kind of political thing, is that Cefin Campbell has been in post now as education portfolio holder for Plaid for a couple of years, and in coming to this interview, this conversation with you today, I was trying to think of another example of that in the Welsh context, and actually I couldn't. So what you've tended to have, haven't you, for the last 25 years since devolution, is Welsh Labour minister after Welsh Labour minister just backfilling somebody who's swooping in from a different brief into education, and then they move on and somebody else comes on, and so on and so forth. I mean, Kirsty Williams was a slight curveball in that respect, but she came in cold. I mean, she wasn't really at that stage. She didn't have a great handle on education, I think it'd be fair to say. The only one I could really think of was Hugh Lewis. Hugh Lewis held a sort of deputy, I think he was deputy children's minister or something like that, I forget the title, but he worked for a couple of years alongside Leighton Andrews before replacing him. But I couldn't really think of another scenario in the last 25 years where you've had somebody who's had basically 2 years on the job, 2 years understanding what the field looks like, what people are experiencing out there. I mean, he's had 2 years to do a bit of homework, hasn't he? So I would like to think, actually, if, as you have suggested, the polls are right, and we do have a Plaid-led government in May, odds on that Cefin Campbell will be our new education minister. And look, it will be, I think, beneficial that we have somebody who's had a bit of time to put his feet under the table, get a bit of read across of the main issues, and will be able to hit the ground running to some extent. Normally, as I say, that doesn't happen in Wales, because you get a Welsh Labour minister parachuted in from something else, and it takes them time to understand the brief. So I think maybe that is one good thing. I mean, this particular discussion is about Plaid Cymru, and there will be other discussions about the other parties, but I think this is probably one thing that is working in his and potentially the system's favour.
Gareth, thank you. Well, that's our post-match analysis for Plaid Cymru. Do have a listen to our other interviews as and when you get the chance. But that's it for this Senedd Election Special. We'll be back soon. Bye for now. You've been listening to a Senedd Election Special brought to you by Emma and Tom Talk Teaching and the Impact Podcast. Today's guest was Cefin Campbell from Plaid Cymru, and you also heard Jane Miller and Finola Wilson from Impact Wales, Dr Gareth Evans from the University of Wales Trinity St David, and me, Tom Breeze. The interview was produced by Darren Evans.